Look at this graph here. What can you see? The United Kingdom is falling behind the rest of the world, and this trade performance chart is of just 2022. How have things changed then? In this video, we'll be talking about the impact Brexit has had on the country ever since the decision that has affected the lives of millions. Let's go back to the graph for a second. What do you notice? There was a huge dip in the second quarter of 2020 for both the UK and the Great Seven. In case you're not familiar, these countries include the United States, Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and of course, the United Kingdom. Think of them as the world's superpowers that meet every year to talk about the global economy. Now, many of you may think that the huge dip in 2020 is because of the coronavirus that had the entire country locked down, right? Well, that is partially true, but the thing is the rest of the G7 was slowly rising back up to their normal trades. As for the UK, they had a completely different story. In 2016, there were over 33 million people who took part in voting in the elections. But wait, was this for a new Prime Minister? That would make sense, wouldn't it? The votes were actually for the Brexit Referendum. This called for the United Kingdom to exit the European Union once and for all, even though it had been part of it for 4 decades. Take a look at this pie chart here. Can you believe that 51.9% of the population out of a 33 million voter turnout wanted to leave the European Union? To put things in perspective, about 17 million people voted to leave, while the ones who voted to stay in the EU fell short by 1 million voters. This was one of the tightest calls in modern UK politics. The result was clear though, Brexit was happening. For a more detailed report, this is what the map of the United Kingdom looked like during the 2016 Brexit referendum. In Britain, 52% voted to leave, while 48% were the Remain votes. Similar numbers were seen in England and Wales. The interesting thing here is Scotland. Just take a look at the numbers here. 62% voted to remain, which is the largest majority in the entire UK. Now, a lot of people know that being part of the European Union has a lot of perks and hardly any disadvantages. So why on earth did the people want to not be a member anymore, and why was Brexit an option in the first place? Well, what they really wanted was a breath of fresh air. They felt they could prioritise the United Kingdom as a country on its own without having 27 other countries meddling with the government. In June 2016, David Cameron, the UK's Prime Minister at the time, stood before the cameras outside 10 Downing Street and officially announced his resignation. This was just a year after his second term, which had a lot of people shocked at the news. The craziest part is that all of this had something to do with Brexit, so sit tight and all will be revealed. Cameron made history in 2010 when he became the youngest Prime Minister in over 20 years at 43 years of age. Since a lot of Conservatives were a fan of his politics, his first term went pretty smoothly. So when the 2015 general election was just around the corner, he felt confident enough to run for a second term. But with his re-election came promises he had to deliver on, one of which was the referendum on the UK's membership in the European Union. Here's the twist though. Cameron wanted to stay with the European Union, but his Conservative colleagues like Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak wanted out. It's like Cameron was carrying out this vote as a formality and had no idea what he had just signed up for. Turns out this whole thing was just Cameron trying to let his ego call the shots. He was so confident that the public would back him up by staying in the European Union, because if they did, he would be an even better Prime Minister than anyone imagined. So what happened next? Cameron was embarrassed to see that just 48.1% of the population chose to remain in the EU. It was so bad that he decided to step down and leave office immediately. What would happen to the country and the people who voted to leave the financial markets? That was no longer his issue. But if you were to get into the actual details of what happened, the UK's position in the EU was rocky from the very start. Ever since it joined the community in 1973, British citizens were wondering if this decision was the right thing to do or not. The EU is famous for letting its influence take over its countries, and everyone in the UK feared that would happen and get in the way of British laws. People also complained about how the Union would impose a ton of rules and regulations, most of which weren't in the country's favour. The United Kingdom contributed more to the EU budget only for benefits received not to be up to the mark. Oh, people also didn't like the immigration rules between members of the European Union. The free movement of citizens from one country to the next was a serious threat to immigration to the UK. So the question is, how has Brexit affected the economy? Between the years 2021 and 2023, a bunch of researchers over at Aston University in England found that the United Kingdom's annual goods exports to the European Union were 17% lower than they would have been if Brexit had never occurred. Their findings also pointed out how exports in most industries had fallen since 2021. They also wrote that the negative effects of Brexit have worsened over time. 2023 had shown the most dramatic decline in trade than previous years. Many small UK businesses which previously exported goods to the EU have stopped doing so because of all the trade blocks that they have had to face. The businesses which could prove to be the UK's future are struggling with more rules, custom checks and documentation requirements. It's very difficult to continue exporting in an economy like this. To make things worse, the British goods being exported to the countries of the European Union lack variety. There are now 1,645 fewer types of UK products being shipped to every country in the Union. This is mainly due to smaller producers abandoning exports to the EU because of the trade blocks that make the whole process too costly and time-consuming. These businesses are losing money when they should be making it. Some sectors like agriculture and textiles, on the other hand, have been hit harder than small businesses. Ever since Brexit, trade with countries located further away from the neighbouring EU countries has become difficult. Even the Commonwealth allies like Cyprus and Malta have been severely impacted. Another part of business that Brexit affected were the investments. There has been a huge drop in investor confidence ever since 2020 because of a number of factors. Here's a graph of the lagging UK business investment ever since Brexit. Is it even possible for a line to dip below the x-axis? See, as compared to Germany, France and the United States, the UK has not only taken the biggest dive after 2020, but it's also finding it very difficult to recover from it. France has surprisingly taken the lead even more than the US. Though accurate data like this isn't really available for 2024, it's safe to say things aren't getting any better. Despite this, Britain still has a high employment rate as compared to other countries of the European Union. This doesn't mean that Brexit hasn't affected the labour market though. Because what's the point of high employment if the GDP of the country isn't improving and there is a clear struggle to bring things back to normal after 2020? Sectors that rely on EU workers such as retail, hospitality and logistics are facing a huge issue. Sure, you could say that the United Kingdom has a very productive and educated workforce, but there's no harm in getting an even more skilled team from the countries of the European Union. Immigration has become a problem for people who planned their future in the UK too. The Home Office's block on skilled worker sponsorship licenses, with hundreds suspended or revoked in 2024, makes everything 1,000 times more chaotic. The talent pool for businesses is almost dried up and things are very difficult as of 2024. Do you know what the craziest part is about this graph? The thick red line here shows the European Union's struggle in maintaining the workforce and economic activity. 2020 was when everyone suffered the most because of the pandemic. But after a few years, all the countries eventually went back to pre-pandemic numbers. Who's the anomaly here? While every other country goes up, the UK is only going down. It's hardly made it above 100 in the Economic Activity Index, which was the standard back in 2019. The restrictions that the UK faces because of Brexit are a major issue for potential businesses and international trade relations. What do you think the government did to control all these blocks? Well, they said that they are trying their best to improve trade relations, especially with the European Union, and remove these blocks. The time-consuming documentations, custom checking and unnecessary fees have made businesses and trading a nightmare for anyone in the UK. But guess what? Ever since Keir Starmer stepped into office, things have started to look more promising. But let's get into more of that detail later on in the video. If you're enjoying content like this, be sure to leave a like and hit that subscribe button to see more videos like this. Trade is an issue, yes, but what about how actual companies and businesses that could make the UK's future shine dealing with all of this? Brexit's impact on foreign direct investment, which you might know as FDI, is one of the bigger concerns of the nation. There has been a huge drop if you were to compare it with the good old days in the late 2010s. These graphs give you an idea of the big decline and struggle to bring back the UK's FDI. In fact, the United Kingdom secured up to 1,654 FDI projects by the end of March 2023, which is an improvement of 4% from 2021 and 2022. Sounds good, doesn't it? Okay, now let's compare the 1,654 FDI projects to the towering curves from 2016 and 2017, because the 4% increase is actually a 27% decrease from those years. To add more fuel to the fire, the impact was seen on UK's key sectors, which include consumer services, media and creative industries, electronics and communication, and of course, businesses. In fact, FDI numbers across Europe have been declining since 2019. Although the United Kingdom stands on top for securing service sector projects, the biggest recipient of foreign funding is France. This is why the businesses in the UK are either moving operations overseas or expanding outside the homeland. Another issue that businesses are facing after Brexit is trying to figure out international banking systems. The anti-money laundering checks aren't making anything easy either. What does this do? Businesses are facing a very long process in opening bank accounts and registering for value-added tax. Call it an administrative headache, if you will. But what about the local businesses? How has the nation's pride been affected throughout all of this? Luckily, there are some business owners who were willing to talk about their post-Brexit experience. Meet Rachna Deer. She specialises in bringing artisan cheeses from across Europe to the city's south side in Glasgow. Rachna has done a lot in gathering loyal customers to her store, but now fears the future of her business is at risk because of Brexit. Since April 30th, 2024, tariffs and checks were applied to certain animal and plant products entering the United Kingdom from the European Union. This is a complete nightmare for Rachna because her business is based on cheese, an animal product from Europe, which, last checked, were countries in the EU. This is what the government calls the common user charge. This will affect goods brought through major entry points like ports and the Eurotunnel. The fees are calculated per type of imported good. Individual products face up to £29 per item, along with an additional £145 for mixed deliveries. In case you didn't know, that's a lot of money. Business owners like Rachna worry about the rising costs because she can't afford to absorb all these costs. Consumers won't buy much, or if worse comes to worse, they'll stop buying entirely. Meanwhile, Michelangelo Onorati, owner of an Italian deli, finds things to be an issue because of what his store is based on. He's trying to avoid raising the prices of the things he sells. Unfortunately, he just can't seem to find a balance between affordability and staying in business. Luckily, fresh fruit and vegetables don't have to face any of the new tariffs, but you never know because chance can happen at any time, any place, especially later in 2024. Speaking of the current year, what is the new Prime Minister doing to tackle everything that the consequences of Brexit are throwing at him and the country? Starmer has assured everyone that economic growth is his primary focus while governing the country. Yet he has ruled out the possibility of rejoining the European Union single market or customs union. Both of these could resolve a lot of challenges in trading with global markets. Official statistics show that exports, which are split nearly equally between goods and services, contribute to a third of the UK's GDP. And where did 48% of the country's goods and exports go to? The European Union. Sources also say that because of Brexit, the UK has had a lower GDP by an estimated 2 to 4% between the 2016 referendum and July 2023. You've seen those graphs shown earlier in the video. Now, what do the long-term forecasts have to say? The Office for Budget Responsibility suggests that new trade relationships with the Union will reduce Britain's economic output by 4% compared to what it would have been had the country remained in the EU. In October 2024, Starmer planned to meet the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, hoping to sort some of the problems out when talking about the UK's Brexit deal. Now that the Labour Party is in charge of the country, they're pushing to reverse everything Brexit has done. Unfortunately, that's not the case here. Even if it were, it would take at least 10 years to go back to how things used to be. But this is where things get even more interesting. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper is against the freedom and movement of young people between the United Kingdom and Europe. Some see this as a door to economic growth and improved trade relations, while others see this as an immigration crisis. You see, most Republicans fear that their jobs will be replaced by foreigners. The reason Brexit happened in the first place was because Conservatives wanted their land to be as British as possible without any European influence whatsoever. The EU's ambassador to the UK, Pedro Serrano, supports the idea of a youth mobility scheme, which means that things could improve for the country after all. Now, the issue is Brussels, who thinks that the United Kingdom won't be committed to strengthening ties with the European Union. The likely scenario to happen is a Conservative Party replacing the Labour Party in the next election and voting for another Brexit. Do you know how bad that would look for the country? Most politicians and governors are hoping to improve the movement scheme for the youth. After all, these people are the future of the country and are the only ones that can bring the economy back up. But not everything seems to be too bad. Despite everything said in this video, there has been a little improvement in certain sectors. While exports of goods to the European Union have declined rapidly, the government did point out that exports of services to the Union have also reached an all-time high. This totals up to around £172 billion, which is $227 billion in just a year. On top of that, economists have noticed that the United Kingdom did fare better in 2024. Forecasts say that Q2 of 2024 and Q1 of 2025 are expected to be at a 0.2% growth. Business investment is expected to rise by 1.4% in 2025 and 2% in 2026. The services sector is projected to lead economic growth with an annual increase of 1%. But of course, the overseas market doesn't look too good. Both imports and exports are expected to shrink until 2025 with a steady rise. Average earnings, on the other hand, are expected to grow at a slower pace over the next few years. This will have an effect on inflation because wages should rise by 4% in the fourth quarter of 2024. As mentioned earlier, the unemployment rate is said to be stable at 4.3% throughout 2024, with a slight increase to 4.4% in the next year. It will then ease back to 4.1% by 2026. This sounds good, but the younger generation, like the rest of the world, are at a disadvantage. The unemployment rate is expected to be at 13.4% in 2025, with hardly any improvement in the next year. It's safe to say that Brexit left a massive impact on the United Kingdom. But what do you think? Will the UK get back to pre-pandemic numbers without the European Union? Or will things only get worse from here on out? Let us know in the comments section below, and if you enjoyed this video, leave a like and hit that subscribe button to see more content. See you in the next one.